3, 2, 1. Sometimes a countdown is necessary to get us to take a risk. I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago up in Wisconsin. Myself, my kids, some of their friends, we all stood on the pier of this very cold lake. We just finished playing basketball. We're all sweaty, and the cool water, it looked terrific. But we also knew that after a cold winter, that water would be freezing. So in order to get us all to do something that we wanted to do, we all said together, okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, and we jumped into the freezing water. And it was cold, but it felt great. Well, today, we're counting down towards a day that I believe is going to be a truly great day at Community, Sunday, September 14th. September 14th is Show Up Sunday because we want every person who's a part of Community to show up on that day. So right now, mark your calendars, cancel any plans you have. Seriously, if you got something else going on the 14th, cancel it right now because I want everybody to show up on Sunday, September 14th. And I believe God wants to use that day to see more people take their first steps back to God than perhaps any other day before in the life of Community. But what it will mean is each of us taking a risk, kind of jumping in, 3, 2, 1. Now, there's 3 ways we can all prepare and jump in and be a part of Show Up Sunday. Last week we talked about inviting, and we gave you this invite challenge card. So you could identify 10 people that you'll invite to join you on September 14th. I got mine, and I got my list. You got yours? But what I want you to do is I don't want you just to invite these people. I also want you to include them in your life. Ask them over to your place for a meal. Ask them to watch a game with you. Ask them to join you in a small group outing. Include them. One of the people I've included in my life has become a friend now. And I invited this person not only to come, and she said yes, but she's also coming on September 14th and bringing her whole extended family. See, I think God wants to use you in the same way. We're going to be pulling out all the stops, doing our very best to make sure your friend and mine have a great experience at Community. So you ready to jump in? I'll tell you what, count down together with me. Everybody, out loud. Ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
It's not enough to invite. We also need to include. Have you ever been invited somewhere, but once you arrived, you felt like you weren't really included? Dave, who we just heard from, actually has a story about that, which those of us on staff find a bit amusing. A few years ago, a staff member, who will remain anonymous, was getting married. Now, naturally, many people from the staff were invited to the wedding, including, of course, our lead pastor, Dave Ferguson. Well, like others, he received his invitation in the mail, and he RSVP'd and sat among all the friends and the relatives as this staff member and his new bride exchanged their vows. But then everyone headed over to the reception. And as is common practice, people were assigned table positions at the reception. And Dave stood at the entrance to the reception hall with the rest of the staff, searching the welcome table for that small little place card that would direct him and his wife Sue to their seats. And they searched. And they searched. As everyone else found their name and entered the hall, Dave and Sue stood outside looking for a place card that wasn't there. They'd been invited, but somehow someone forgot to include them. Well, what do you do in that situation? Well, Dave and Sue ended up eating dinner at a nearby restaurant. So the next day, the guy was fired. No, I'm just kidding. He's still on staff trying to live that down. It's not enough to invite. We also need to include. Last week we talked about the empty chairs in the room and how September 14th, opening day, Show Up Sunday, it gives us an opportunity to fill every empty chair so that nothing God has prepared for people at this celebration goes to waste. Remember, God can't do much with an empty chair, but when someone sits in that chair, it creates an opportunity for that person to encounter God, to get connected with other Christ followers, to be mobilized to bless their neighborhood. Our prayer is that every empty chair will be filled, because every empty chair represents a person who needs to find their way back to God. But filling the chair is only the first step in the process. Once a person sits in the chair, God has another role for us to play. It is not enough for us to invite. we also need to include. Now, last year, we had a group of visitors from South Africa visit our church. They'd been traveling around the United States, visiting various churches to learn things that they might apply back home in their own churches. And they attended a service at one of our campuses and had a lot of positive things to say about their experience. But as they talked to the campus pastor, they began asking questions about a phenomenon that they had noticed at almost every American church they visited. They asked this. They said, "Why is it that only the people with name tags talk to us?" Now, there's some good news in their comments and questions. Our First Impressions team did a great job of welcoming them that day. The people who wear lanyards and name tags and man the doors and the welcome tables, they greeted them, they engaged them in conversations, and included them in the community. But the bad news is that no one without a name tag spoke to them during their visit. Has that ever happened to you? Maybe even the first time you came to community? It's hard to come to a church for the first time, isn't it? Especially if you're by yourself. And it can be awkward to sit there with people talking and connecting all around you. Is it just the job of the people with name tags to talk to our guests? Our African guest asked, is that the way that things are run in American churches? Now, don't get me wrong. Our First Impressions teams are awesome. We have them precisely because we want people to be greeted and included. But I have to wonder, what kind of impact could we have if we all became includers? Today, we're looking at the story of a man who at first was not included in a community of Christ followers. In fact, as strange as it may sound, the disciples, the men and women who had walked most closely with Jesus and had seen firsthand how inclusive he was, at first these very disciples shunned the man in our story. I mean, why would they do that? Why would they not include him? Well, when you know a little bit more about his background, it might not seem as strange. You see, Saul, he was a scary guy. He'd been brought up and trained in the upper levels of Jewish religious society. He held a lot of power, and he didn't care much for these newly declared followers of Jesus. In fact, that's an understatement. He was out to destroy them. In the opening verses of Acts 9, we read this. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found anyone there who belonged to the Way, which was the name the first Christians used to identify themselves, whether they be men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. But on the way to Damascus to carry out this plan, Saul has a life-changing experience. He is blinded by a bright light, and he hears this voice call out to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked, and the voice replies, I am Jesus, who you are persecuting. Well, almost instantly, Saul is converted. He becomes a Christ follower and he's baptized. And right away, he begins to preach boldly, proving to all who would listen that Jesus is the Messiah. But just as he had once planned to murder disciples of Jesus, his former comrades now devise a plan to kill him. Aware of this plan, the Christ followers in Damascus, they end up saving Saul's life by helping him escape the city under the cover of darkness. And they send him back to Jerusalem. So Saul returns to Jerusalem, the place where Peter and Andrew and James and John and the rest of Jesus' closest friends were leading the local community of the Way. And look what happens. When he came to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he really was a disciple. He tried to join them, but they were afraid of him and they wouldn't include him. Now, when you stop to think about it, it's really not that strange that fear was the thing that kept them from including Saul, is it? I mean, isn't fear often the thing that keeps us from including others too? I mean, sure, maybe we're not afraid that they're out to murder us, but aren't we often afraid of our differences. And we can be uncomfortable around people who aren't like us. How will we relate to them? What if we have nothing in common? What if they don't easily fit into the uniformity we've surrounded ourselves with in our circle of friends? Sometimes we're afraid of getting burned. Maybe we've been hurt in the past. We tried to include someone and they rejected us, or maybe we tried to be included and got rejected. I mean, including requires us to risk, and that can be a scary thing. Sometimes we're afraid of commitment. If we include someone, won't we then be required to give them our time and our attention? I mean, we're okay with being friendly, but we're not so sure if we really want to extend friendship. I mean, friendly is a smile or a wave or a hello. Including requires actual friendship. As someone who's more of an introvert by nature, I can relate to this one. I mean, when I don't really know a person, I have almost an irrational level of fear about spending extended amounts of time with them. I mean, just the other day, someone suggested that I give someone a ride in my car, a drive that would have taken quite a little while. And I instantly felt myself panicking. Now, it has nothing to do with this person. It's this ridiculous fear in me that if I go beyond friendly with too many people, then the demands of friendship are going to suck me dry. And I know it was just a car ride and I'm a horrible person. But that's what fear can do to us. For reasons that are probably more justified than our own, the disciples are afraid of Saul and they refuse to include him. How tragic it would have been if our story had ended there. But thankfully, it doesn't. Just in the nick of time, a hero steps in, an includer, and his name is Barnabas. When Saul was on the outside looking in, Barnabas took him, and he brought him to the apostles. He told them how Saul, on his journey, had seen the Lord, and that the Lord had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. So Saul stayed with them and moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. Barnabas is an includer, and he stands in the gap between Saul and this community of disciples, and he brings the two together. Now, just how did he do that? Well, let's look a little more closely at what this passage says and what it implies. First, Barnabas includes Saul personally. Notice how the passage says he, Barnabas, told them. Barnabas was the one telling Saul's story. Now, obviously, that means he knew Saul's story. In order to tell Saul's story, Barnabas needed to know Saul's story. While others were holding Saul at arm's length, Barnabas was getting to know him. See, includers take time to learn people's stories. One of the best ways we can include someone personally is by asking questions about their life and actually listening to their answers. It's really pretty simple, but do you know how rare it can be? We can learn a lot about people's stories just by asking simple questions like, where are you originally from? How did you end up moving here? What do you do for a living? Did you always set out to do that? Or what other jobs have you had in your life? Or how did you end up coming here to community? Have you been a part of a church like this before? See, taking a genuine interest in learning a person's story, it is a key way to include him or her personally. While the rest of the disciples were holding Saul at arm's length, Barnabas was getting to know him. But Barnabas didn't just include Saul personally. He also includes Saul in the group. Notice, Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. He brought Saul into the group. I kind of imagine him physically, taking Saul by the arm and marching him into the room where the disciples were gathered. He wasn't about to see Saul excluded. Barnabas' action, it quelled the fears of the disciples. They trusted Barnabas, so they accepted Saul. And once he had everyone in the room, as we mentioned, Barnabas tells Saul's story. That's what includers do. They tell other people's stories. You see, once we know somebody's story, we'll begin to see the connections between that person's story and other stories in the group. Here's what I mean. About 9 months ago, Audrey began attending the campus that I attend in Lincoln Square. And in conversations I had with her before and after church, I learned that she had a passion for dance and that she had experience as a dance instructor. And do you know what my first thought was? My first thought was, I need to introduce Audrey to Jessica and Ginny. You see, Jessica and Ginny were both in my small group, and I knew that they both had a background in dance. So a week or two later, we had this lunch gathering after church, and I made sure to introduce Audrey to Jessica and Ginny and began to tell them each other's stories. Here's something we need to understand if we're gonna be includers. People aren't always gonna tell their own stories. It's hard to go around saying, hey everyone, here's who I am, here's what I'm about. I mean, right? That's a little awkward, but we can help them be included in the group if we tell their stories for them. The best part of making that initial connection between Audrey and Jessica and Ginny was about a week or two later, I showed up to small group and Jessica said to me, hey, Audrey texted me and she's gonna join us for group tonight. And now Audrey is a part of our group. We can include people when we tell their stories. So Barnabas included Saul personally, he included Saul in the group, and ultimately, Saul was included in the mission. Notice how it says Saul stayed with them, and he moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He became one of them, and he joined them in the work of advancing the Jesus mission in Jerusalem and beyond. In fact, Saul became a primary leader in the mission of helping people find their way back to God. Many of you probably know that shortly after this, Saul began to go by the name Paul, the Apostle Paul. And no one had a bigger impact in advancing the Jesus mission during that first century than Paul. I mean, can you imagine what might have been lost if he hadn't been included? Who can say for sure? But if Paul hadn't been included, 13 of the 27 books we have in the New Testament of our Bible might not have been written. 7 of the 14 churches that were planted in the region of Asia Minor might not have been planted. Thousands upon thousands of people might not have found their way back to God. The most influential person in the history of Christianity besides Jesus himself might have been left on the outside looking in. Thank goodness for Barnabas, the includer. Without him, who knows what might have been lost? So here's the challenge for every one of us as we lead up to our September 14th opening day, Show Up Sunday. Become an includer. You see, a lot of what we do at Community on the weekends, it's intended to help include people in our community. I mean, why do we have first impressions teams? It's because we want every person to be warmly greeted the minute they walk up to the door. We want every person to feel like it matters that they're here. We want every person to have someone they can turn to so that if they have questions, they can find answers, people that can help them take a next step towards getting connected. We want them to be included. Why do we have hospitality teams that serve coffee and food? It's because we know food brings people together. Being able to come over and fix a cup of coffee or grab a bagel, it gives someone something to do when they arrive in our building for the first time. I mean, you know how awkward and scary it can be to come into a new place for the first time. Through our hospitality teams, we're trying to communicate, you are welcome here. We've prepared this just for you. Come and be included in this celebration. For some of us, perhaps the step we need to take today to become an includer is to join one of these teams, to serve on first impressions or hospitality, to help make people feel welcomed and included. But including is not just the job of those with name tags on. We all can play a role in helping people feel included here on the weekends. And I want to give you 3 quick ways that you and I can be includers during this time. The first is what we call meet and greet. It's that moment in the service where we tell you to turn to someone near you and say hello. I mean, have you ever thought about why we take a few moments in our service for this? It's not just a transition moment to get the band off stage and get the next speaker in place. It's an including opportunity. What if during meet and greet, every one of us made it a point to turn to someone we don't know and genuinely reach out to them? I mean, learn their name. Ask the question, have you been coming to community for a while? I mean, don't think of meet and greet as just a quick moment where you are friendly. Think of it as an introduction that could be the first step in a friendship. And here's a little secret. You have permission to turn back to that person after the service is over and have a real conversation, which leads to the second way we can all be includers. We can learn people's stories. Take the time to ask the basic questions that'll help you get to know the people sitting around you, especially if they're new to our community. People feel included when they are known, and you might discover something about their story that you could tell to help connect that person to others. And finally, the third quick way that you and I can be includers, and this one might sound out of the box, unthinkable, maybe even impossible, but stick with me because I think it could be done. The third way that you and I can be an includer is this. Arrive early. Now, whoa, I know that's revolutionary, right? But here's the thing. Most new people get here a little bit before the service starts. And it's hard for you to help include them if you're not here. Now, I know it's more in vogue to make an entrance during the second worship song, but arriving early will give you a few minutes to meet someone new, to have a conversation, to include them. You just never know how those 5 or 10 minutes could make all the difference in a person's life. We can all work together to help people feel included here in our community, but let's make this even more personal. Earlier, Dave Ferguson reminded us of the invite challenge card that we're using during the series to challenge one another to invite 10 people to join us for our September 14th opening day. When you think about the people you have or will list on your card, I want to challenge you with this. Don't just invite them. Include them. Introduce them to others when they come. Tell their story to other people in this room. Take them out to lunch after the service. Take them with you to your small group. Don't just invite them, include them. We all are Barnabas, and we all have a Saul, someone who is on the outside looking in, someone who desperately needs to be included. It's not enough to be inviters. We have to be includers. When you think of the person that you hope will come and fill a chair on September 14th, how can we all work together to make this person feel included? It's not enough to be inviters. We need to include every person who comes and sits in a chair. It's not enough to be inviters. We have to be includers. Let's not leave anyone on the outside looking in.